If you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next parts of the story, because nothing about what happened that night was simple, and the way it ended still feels unreal even now. When my wife left for what she called just a little party with the girls, I had one of those quiet, heavy feelings in my chest, the kind that tells you something is wrong before your mind catches up. Sarah had been distant for months, drifting from me in small, almost invisible ways at first. Late nights with no explanations. New friends I'd never met. Conversations that felt like talking to someone behind a glass wall. But it wasn't until that night, when she laughed at my concern and called me paranoid, that I realized how far apart we'd really grown. I wasn't the jealous type. Never had been. I gave her space, trusted her judgment, and believed the best in her even when things felt off. But as she stood in the kitchen adjusting her earrings, snapping that I was overreacting, something inside me tightened. It wasn't fear of losing her. It was the realization that maybe I already had. She left around 9, gave me a quick, almost dismissive kiss on the cheek, the kind you give a relative you barely know, and said not to stay up waiting. I watched her walk to the car, the streetlight catching her hair, and for a moment I almost convinced myself everything would be fine. People go through phases, marriages hit rough patches, maybe I was imagining all of it. But by midnight she still hadn't answered a single text. By 1 a.m. her phone went straight to voicemail, and that's when the feeling in my chest finally spoke clearly. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just in my head. I didn't call again, didn't text, didn't pace around the living room trying to guess where she was. I just opened the Find My app we'd both installed months ago after she lost her phone at Target. I told myself I wasn't snooping, I was just checking. But when the screen loaded, and her little location didn't land anywhere near Tara's house, every thought in my mind stopped cold. She wasn't at a party. She wasn't even in the right part of town. She was at a rundown roadside motel, the kind people only go to when they don't want to be seen. The kind you pretend doesn't exist. I sat there for a long moment staring at the screen, the blinking location pin pulsing like a heartbeat. Part of me hoped it was a glitch, a wrong address, anything that made sense. But deep down, something old and tired inside me knew the truth before I said it out loud. I grabbed my keys, locked the house behind me, and drove through the quiet streets without turning on the radio. The silence felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I didn't speed. I didn't let anger take over. I just drove, calm in a way that scared me more than rage ever could. The motel stood alone at the edge of town, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the dark sky. Only a few cars sat in the lot, windows fogged, curtains closed. But hers was impossible to miss. She'd parked it in the far corner, half hidden, as if even her subconscious knew what she was doing was wrong. I pulled in slowly, turning off my headlights as I coasted to a stop. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. I just stepped out of the car, the cool night air brushing against my skin, and walked toward the row of rooms with a strange clarity in my mind. Her location hadn't moved for over an hour. When I reached the room closest to where her car was parked, the thin cracks of light beneath the blinds told me everything I needed to know. I stood still for a moment, listening. First, nothing. Then, faint laughter. Her voice. And a man's. Something inside me went quiet and hollow, like a switch flipping off. Not violent. Not dramatic. Just done. I knocked once. Firm. Not loud enough to wake the whole building, but loud enough that anyone inside would know this wasn't a mistake. The voices stopped. Movement followed. A muffled whisper. A shuffle of feet. Then the door opened just a few inches, enough for me to see her face. Makeup smudged. Hair messy. Eyes wide with a kind of panic she couldn't hide. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. Like I was the one who owed her an explanation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push past her. I just looked at her, then past her, and saw the shape of a man sitting on the edge of the bed behind her, shirt half buttoned, staring at the floor. And in that moment, everything between us, years of marriage, late night talks, shared dreams, collapsed into something small and fragile. Like ash in the wind, I said only one sentence. The only sentence left that mattered. "I'm not your husband anymore." and I walked away. I didn't look back when I walked away from that motel door, even though I could hear her voice rising behind me, a frantic whisper turning into a pleading call of my name. I didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing my face or reading whatever last-minute lie she was scrambling to form. I just kept walking until the night air swallowed her voice completely. By the time I reached my car, the weight of everything she had done finally settled in. Not like a punch, but like a slow, heavy tide pulling at my chest. I didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't break anything. I sat behind the wheel in absolute silence, watching the glow from their room spill faintly across the parking lot. The same room where my wife had chosen to let our marriage die long before I knocked. I drove home slowly. Not because I was tired, but because rushing felt pointless. The streetlights dragged across the windshield in long streaks, the empty road stretching out in front of me like some endless corridor I had to walk alone. When I pulled into our driveway, everything looked exactly the same. Our porch lights still on, the flower pot she refused to throw away still by the steps, the curtains slightly open like always. It was almost offensive how normal it all looked, how quietly the world waited while something inside me had been ripped apart. I stepped into the house, shut the door behind me, and felt the silence hit me like a wall. This was the house we bought together, the house we painted, the living room where we watched cheap movies and argued about takeout. Now it felt haunted, like every memory inside was suddenly contaminated. I placed my phone on the counter and stared at it, half expecting it to light up with her name. But it didn't. Not yet. Maybe she was still at the motel trying to clean up the mess she made. Maybe she was driving home rehearsing excuses. Maybe she was sitting in her car crying. None of it mattered. Not anymore. I walked to the sink, filled a glass with water, and leaned against the counter trying to understand how easily everything had changed. I'd always believed betrayal came with a dramatic moment, a shout, a fight, some huge confrontation. But standing in my quiet kitchen, I realized betrayal doesn't explode. It erodes you slowly, and then all at once I went to the bedroom and stared at the bed we had shared for years. I couldn't bring myself to lie in it. Instead, I sat on the edge of the mattress and let the numbness settle deeper into my bones. I thought about the small signs I'd ignored, the late nights, the quiet phone, the sudden coldness in her voice when I asked simple questions, the way she looked away when I said I missed her. At the time, I convinced myself they were normal marriage hurdles. Stress, busy schedules. But they weren't. They were warnings, and I had walked past every single one like a fool who believed love alone could keep a sinking ship afloat. Around 3 in the morning, my phone finally buzzed. Once, twice, then again. I didn't reach for it. I let it vibrate against the countertop until it stopped. When it lit up again with her name, I turned the phone over so I couldn't see the screen. I didn't block her. Not yet. I wanted her words to reach the void she'd created. I wanted her to know silence was the only answer she'd get from me. After a while, exhaustion finally pulled me down. I lay on top of the covers fully dressed and let sleep take me. Even though it felt shallow and uneasy that I woke just after sunrise, my throat dry, my head heavy. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then everything came roaring back. The motel, the voices, her face when she saw me. I sat up slowly as sunlight crept across the floor. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels wrong, like something inside it has died. I checked my phone. 23 missed calls, 11 messages, a few voicemails I didn't open. I didn't read any of them. Instead, I grabbed my keys, left the house, and drove without thinking. I ended up at a small motel on the opposite side of town. The contrast between this place and the one she chose wasn't lost on me. I walked inside, paid for a room in cash, and went up the creaky stairs to the second floor. The room smelled like dust and old carpet, but that didn't bother me. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here because I needed distance, physical and emotional, away from anything that reminded me of her. I showered, changed clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall. It was strange how quickly the world could shrink into 4 small beige walls and a single heavy truth. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. A minute later, it buzzed once more. Then again. She wasn't going to give up. She never did when she felt cornered. I finally powered the phone off entirely and placed it in the drawer beside the bed. If she wanted to understand what she'd done to me, she would need to sit with the silence she created. Hours passed. Maybe 3. Maybe 4. Time started losing shape. I tried to sleep but couldn't. I tried to think but my thoughts were just a tangle of questions with no answers. Eventually, I got up, grabbed my jacket, and left the motel room for a walk. I needed air. I needed something that didn't feel suffocating. When I stepped outside, the afternoon sun was already sinking. The parking lot was quiet except for a man smoking near the vending machine and an old couple arguing softly near their car. I walked past them toward the street, my mind unfocused, my steps heavy. I didn't know where I was going until I saw the diner across the road. The kind of place families go after church. I went in, sat in a booth by the window, and ordered coffee. I didn't really want that as I sat there staring at nothing. A thought hit me with such clarity it made my chest tighten. I didn't want to go back to the house we shared. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. That house was built on memories, but the foundation was cracked beyond repair. And the moment I admitted that to myself, a strange, cold calm settled over me. Not freedom, not relief, just acceptance. Halfway through my untouched coffee, I heard the diner door open behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. I could feel her before I saw her. Her steps, her hesitancy, her breath catching when she recognized me. She stood behind my booth, trembling. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Please look at me." I didn't. Not yet. Not until she earned even a second of my attention. And when I finally did turn, slowly, deliberately, the look on her face told me she already sensed the truth. No matter what she said next, nothing would ever be the same again. She stood there in the aisle of that diner like someone whose entire world had just collapsed, clutching her phone in both hands as if the screen held the last pieces of her dignity. Her blonde hair, usually styled to perfection, hung in loose, messy strands. Her eyes were swollen, the skin beneath them pale and tight from a night of crying. She looked nothing like the woman I had watched walk out the door in a sparkly dress the night before, full of confidence and indifference. This version of her was small, shaken, almost fragile. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel responsible for picking her up. She tried again with a whisper that trembled down the middle. "Please, we need to talk." I didn't want to talk, but I also didn't want a scene. So I nodded toward the booth across from me without saying a word. She slid into the seat like she was afraid the vinyl might bite her. Her hands shook when she placed her phone on the table, screen down, like she was trying to hide from its contents. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I looked at her. She looked anywhere but at me. Finally, she let out a slow, shuddering breath. "I know I messed up." Her voice cracked on the second word. "I know you hate me right now." I didn't respond. I didn't hate her. Oddly, I didn't feel much at all. The storm had passed the moment I saw her in that motel doorway, and all that remained was the ruins. She took my silence as a cue to keep talking. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I didn't go there planning anything. I swear. I don't know. Things felt wrong between us. I felt distant and confused and I lifted a hand slightly and she fell quiet immediately. I wasn't in the mood for the classics. Confusion, stress. I wasn't thinking clearly. It didn't mean anything. I'd heard variations of them from friends, coworkers, strangers on the internet. They were all the same, and they all meant nothing. "Don't insult me," I finally said. My voice came out calm, too calm probably. But it was the only tone I had left. "Don't pretend confusion lands people in motel rooms." "I didn't mean for it to get that far," she whispered again, staring down at her hands. "I swear I didn't." I took a slow breath and leaned back in my seat. The waitress came by to ask if we wanted anything, but I shook my head. Sarah tried to smile weakly at her, but her lips twitched instead, collapsing into a tight line. When we were alone again, she pushed out the words she'd clearly rehearsed. "I want to fix this. I want us. I'm begging you, just talk to me. Tell me what you're thinking." Tell me what you need." I stared at her for a long moment, and she finally met my gaze. Her eyes held desperation, guilt, and something else, fear. But she was missing something I needed more than apologies. Responsibility. Real responsibility. Not excuses disguised as remorse. "What I need," I said slowly, "is the truth, the real truth. Not the version you tell yourself so you can sleep at night. Not the version where this was an accident. Not the one where you blame our distance or your confusion. Just the truth." She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. I don't know if I can." That was all I needed to hear. I slid out of the booth, ready to leave, but she reached across the table and grabbed my hand with shaking fingers. Her grip was desperate, almost painful. "Please, don't go. I'll tell you whatever you want. I'll tell you everything. Just don't walk out on me." That's when I realized she wasn't fighting for me. She was fighting for the version of her life where she didn't lose everything at once. The stable home, the comfortable life, the image of a marriage that made her look good in front of others. She wasn't fighting for me. She was fighting for herself. I pulled my hand from hers gently but firmly. "You already know why I walked out last night," I said. "The only difference now is that you finally have to face it." She blinked hard, fresh tears gathering again. But she straightened slightly, steeling herself like someone about to jump into cold water. "Fine," she whispered. "Then ask. What do you want to know?" I looked at her for a long, heavy moment. "How long?" She flinched like I had slapped her. Her fingers curled into fists on the table. "A few months," she said quietly. "Maybe more. I don't know exactly. It started small. Talking, texting. I didn't think it would turn into anything." I nodded once, slowly. That answer told me more than she realized. I leaned forward. "So last night wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't a random mistake. It was a continuation." Her eyes filled, but she didn't deny it. For the first time since this began, she didn't try to twist anything. She didn't manipulate. She just sat with the truth, silent and trembling. The diner felt too small, too bright, too normal for something this raw. I stood up again, grabbing my jacket. "I'm done, Sarah." Her breath hitched sharply, like she had been stabbed. "Don't say that," she begged. "Please. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut him off. I'll delete everything. I'll do anything you want." "I already did everything I could," I said. "You just didn't notice." She let out a sound between a sob and a gasp, one hand covering her mouth. I took a few steps away from the booth, and that's when she asked the question I'd been waiting for. One she didn't even realize mattered more than any apology. "Where are you going?" I turned slightly, not enough to fully face her. "Somewhere you're not." Her chair scraped loudly as she stood up in panic. No, please don't leave like this. Don't walk away. Don't just ghost me." I finally turned to look at her directly, and the truth hit her the same moment it left my mouth. "You ghosted us months ago," I said quietly. "I'm just returning the version of love you gave me." Her knees weakened as if the floor shifted under her. She reached out for the table to steady herself, tears rolling down her cheeks. That I walked out of the diner without looking back. When the door swung shut behind me, her sobs were cut off, replaced by the low hum of traffic and the sound of wind brushing past the windows. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, breathing in the cold air, feeling the weight in my chest finally loosen a fraction. There wasn't relief yet. That would come later. But there was clarity, sharp, cold, undeniable clarity. I pulled out my phone, powered it on, and stared at the flood of messages that lit up the screen. Then I took a long breath, opened the settings, and blocked her number completely. No dramatic exit. No final argument. No last conversation. Just silence. And as I walked back toward the motel, a strange, steady thought formed in my mind, one that finally felt like truth. Sometimes the quietest goodbye is the loudest one a person ever hears. I walked back toward the motel with the same slow, deliberate steps I'd taken walking into that diner, except this time there was no weight pushing down on my shoulders. No fog of confusion. No hope clawing at the edges of my thoughts. Just a calm, cold certainty that the version of my life I had lived until last night was over. And maybe it had ended long before I admitted it. Maybe I'd been living on autopilot, mistaking routine for connection, mistaking proximity for love. But now the truth was out, raw and irreversible, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was actually breathing. When I reached my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall as the late afternoon sun bled through the thin curtains. Dust floated in the air, drifting like tiny, aimless particles, and for some reason that image stuck with me. How quiet they looked, even though they were always moving. I've been like that, I realized, floating, pretending to be still in a life that had stopped being mine. Pretending things could settle if I just didn't move too quickly. Now I understood the truth. Staying still had broken me more than the betrayal ever could. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A single notification from an unknown number. Blocked numbers still find ways to leave their shadows. I didn't open it. I turned the phone face down again and let the silence wash over me. I didn't know how long I sat there before I finally stood up and walked to the sink. The motel mirror was scratched and clouded, but I could still see my reflection. Tired eyes, unshaven face, a man who had aged years in one night and somehow looked lighter for it. I didn't recognize this version of myself, but I didn't hate him either. He felt honest, real, unapologetically done with pretending. Eventually, the walls started to feel too tight again, so I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The sky had shifted to a dull gold, the sun inching lower across the horizon. I walked until I found myself sitting on a concrete barrier near the parking lot, watching cars pass by on the highway, people going somewhere, people going home, people beginning or ending days filled with problems that had nothing to do with mine. And for a moment, that anonymity felt comforting. My story wasn't unique. Cheating wasn't new, heartbreak wasn't new, walking away wasn't new. But what mattered was that this was the first time I wasn't trying to salvage something that didn't want to be saved. After a while, I pulled out my phone again, not to check messages, not to scroll through photos, but to call someone I knew I could trust. Mark answered on the second ring, his voice surprised but steady. "You all right, man?" he asked. The concern was immediate, genuine, the kind that doesn't ask for details unless you offer them. "I'm all right," I said, and strangely, I meant it. "You want company? I can come get you, or you can crash at my place. Whatever you need." For a moment, the idea of being around someone I didn't need to explain myself to felt like a lifeline. But I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. "Not tonight," I said. "I just needed to hear a normal voice." He exhaled softly. "You know I'm here, man, day or night." "I know," I said, and I did. When I ended the call, I sat in silence for another few minutes, then finally stood up. Something had shifted inside me. Not healed, but settled. A decision forming with each quiet breath. I went back to my room, grabbed my duffel bag, and checked out of the motel. The clerk barely looked up as I handed him the key, mumbling a half-interested, "Have a good evening." The words were almost ironic, but I didn't correct him. I stepped outside, night settling deeper around me, and got into my car. I didn't go home. I didn't want to step back into the place that held pieces of a life that no longer existed. Instead, I drove around the city with the windows cracked open, letting the air cool my face. I passed parks where kids were still playing under streetlights, couples sitting on benches, families walking dogs. Every scene felt like another universe, one where people still trusted each other, still believed their homes were safe, still believed love didn't break quietly in the dark. By the time the sky shifted from orange to deep blue, I knew what I needed to do. I drove back to the house, not to reconcile, not to talk, but to gather what was mine and close the chapter properly. The neighborhood was quiet. The porch light was still on, the same way it had been when I left the night before. Except this time, the thought didn't hurt. It felt distant, like remembering a house from childhood rather than one I lived in just yesterday. When I opened the door, the smell of the place hit me like a memory I didn't want. I stepped inside slowly, the floor creaking beneath my feet. For a moment, I stood in the dark entryway, letting my eyes adjust. The kitchen was empty. The living room lights were off. But I could hear her from down the hall, soft, muffled crying. She had stayed, waiting, hoping, preparing another speech or another version of the truth. I didn't go to her. I went straight to the bedroom and turned on the light. The room looked exactly as it always had, except the bed was messy on her side and the pillow was damp. I pulled out my suitcase and began packing clothes, documents, essentials. The process felt mechanical, like I wasn't packing for a trip but erasing myself from a life. Every shirt folded neatly, every drawer emptied cleanly. Every item chosen carefully felt like reclaiming ground I'd lost long ago. When I zipped the suitcase and lifted it from the bed, she finally appeared in the doorway. Her voice was hoarse, broken from crying. "You're really doing this?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. She took a slow step forward. "Can we at least talk? Can we try to understand what happened? I know I hurt you, but don't end this like it meant nothing." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. Not hatred, not love, not anger, just clarity. "It didn't mean nothing," I said. "It meant enough to leave." She covered her mouth with her hand as if the words physically struck her. Fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm begging you," she whispered. "Don't go. We can rebuild. We can start over." "We can't," I said. "You already started over with someone else." She broke then, her shoulders shaking, her breath hitching, her sobs loud enough to echo down the hall. But the sound didn't move me. It didn't stop me. It didn't bring me back. It only confirmed how long she had expected me to stay, no matter what she did. I walked past her slowly, my suitcase rolling behind me. At the front door, I paused, not to rethink, but to take one final breath in the place that used to be home. She followed me, still pleading through tears. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't ghost me. Please don't leave me like this." I turned to her one last time. "I'm not ghosting you," I said. "I'm just choosing myself for once." And then I stepped outside, closing the door behind me with a soft click. No slam, no drama, just an ending. The night air felt colder, but cleaner somehow. I placed my suitcase in the trunk, got into the car, and started the engine. As I pulled away from the house, our house, her house, once our life, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. Some chapters aren't meant to be reread. Some doors close quietly so you can hear the next one open. When I reached the end of the street, a strange feeling washed over me. Not joy, not grief, but freedom. The kind you only get after finally letting go of something heavy you didn't realize you'd been carrying for too long. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like myself again. If you want to hear more stories like this, make sure you subscribe, because the next chapter of my life didn't end here. It started here.